I have and always have had a complicated relationship to Camel Pose, to put it politely. Camel Pose has never been an immediately comfortable, spacious, or freeing backbend for me. It's really been a continuous work in progress, but I'm not very different than the majority of my students. For some people, Camel Pose is immediate. It feels amazing and spacious and freeing. But for so many, we need to know how to troubleshoot the pose, and we need to understand how to make this pose work a little bit better for our body. So for those of you that already love the pose, this is great. You're gonna love it even more. For those of you that are students, and for those of you that are teachers that have students that struggle with this pose, I'm going to give you the ways to really troubleshoot it and to think about the pose a little bit more differently so that it can really start to work for you and we can feel good in our body while we practice it. My name is Jason Crandall. I've been an internationally respected yoga teacher, teaching at the world's most prestigious conferences and festivals for nearly 30 years. If you're a yoga teacher and you want to expand your education and go more deeply into this work, I have an incredible all-online 300-hour advanced teacher training program. I also have ongoing continuing education courses in the most essential subject matters that we as yoga teachers need to learn more about in order to expand our professional scope. For those of you that are not yoga teachers but are interested in deepening your practice and becoming a teacher, I also have an all-online 200-hour teacher training program. That information is available below. We're going to look at 5 different ways of working with Camel Pose and improving our experience. The first 3 are really going to be rooted in troubleshooting areas of the body that people are struggling with. So we'll look at how to deal with lower back discomfort in the pose, neck discomfort in the pose, and knee discomfort in the pose. And then the final 2 things that we'll do is we'll look at 2 different ways of just helping the pose feel a little bit more spacious and deep, and ensuring that we're simultaneously developing strength and control within our flexibility in the posture. Discomfort in the lower back in Camel Pose is almost always because the lower back is compensating by moving too much relative to the thoracic spine above it or the hip joint below it. Now, let's transition into the pose. Begin, take your hands to your hips, and as you start to shift your hands back towards your heels or towards your blocks, allow your pelvis to come with you. Lean your hips back. Do not force them to stay above the knees. There is no need to do that, especially in this scenario. So we allow the hips to come back pretty far actually. Then we get the hands to the heels or we get the hands to blocks. Now, create a little posterior pelvic tilt. This is not always necessary, but in this situation it is. So we're gonna lift the hip point slightly, and we're gonna lengthen the back of the pelvis down. Start to shift your hips forward again as you lift and expand the chest, the heart, the lungs. Continue to bring the hips and the thighs forward. Continue to lift the chest, the heart, and the lungs until you get a nice, even, spacious back bend. And if at any point you get that compression in the lower back again, shift the hips further back. The more you force the hips to be forward and the pelvis to be over the knees, the more likely it is that you're gonna get this compression. Now, as you're ready, take a moment or 2 in the pose, should feel more equanimous, and then as you're ready, come up and out. Similar to the lower back, but often worse, is the experience of the neck compressing in this pose. This can be a really hard pose to know what to do with your neck. And so I'm gonna show you exactly what I love to do, but first I wanna show you a little demonstration. The main reason that the neck feels uncomfortable in this pose is when everything else in the pose is insufficiently flexible to allow the neck to just hang in the pose. If you have a spacious, happy, open pose and you can let the head and neck hang, go for it. But look, everybody, I want you to imagine that in Ustrasana, someone can only get the spine, the rib cage, and the breastbone to this angle. So imagine I'm doing Ustrasana going this way, right? That's probably where I am. Now, if I let my head and neck go while my spine is still kind of angled a little bit more upright, if I drop my head, I'm gonna get a big compressive kink in the back of the neck because like the lower back, it's gonna go too far relative to everything else. Now, if I was much more flexible, or you or your students were much more flexible, and in the pose, the chest was facing the ceiling, right? And you had this big, open, spacious back bend like some do, and the heart's truly facing up, then if you let the head and neck go, it's not really gonna be a problem because that neck is gonna make a commensurate curve, and it's not gonna get that hyperextension. So everybody, I love this version of the pose, and I think it's an amazing version of the pose to do regardless of neck pain. That this is the thing time and time again that works for me and my students that don't love the neck experience in Ustrasana. For this version of the pose, we're gonna do Ardha Ustrasana with one arm supporting the head and neck. To begin, start on your knees, look over your right shoulder, and take your right hand to the right heel or to a block. Now, you can keep the hips directly stacked over the knees, or like we did in the previous version, you can let the hips pull a little further back towards the feet to offload lower back discomfort. Now, your left arm is free. I want you to take your left arm in headstand. With your left hand, cup the back of the head. Now, you're still gonna be looking a little bit over the right shoulder. So your right hand is on the right heel, and the left hand is gonna be cupping the back of the head, okay? Now, you're gonna keep that. But maintaining that setup, start to turn your belly, ribs, and chest to face forward again. Your chest, your upper back, your spine, your head and neck have a more conventional position, but the left hand holding the back of the head is giving that neck support. So you can let the weight of the head fully drop into the hand, and with the hand, you can actually even gently traction the neck. So not only are you supporting the head, but you're tractioning the neck, right? So you're looking up, your chest is facing up, you're doing all of the other actions in this pose, but now with amazing head and neck support. To transition out, inhale, come up out of the pose. Then exhale, sit back down on the heels, and you repeat the same pose on the second side. Before we shift our attention to focusing on other macro ways that we can improve the pose, let's make sure we know how to alleviate any knee discomfort people are experiencing in the pose. The first thing that people will tend to jump to when they're feeling knee discomfort is to pad the knees. Of course, try that. But there's another way of supporting the knee that many people just aren't aware of. And that's to not support the knee directly, but to support just below the knee. So in this scenario, what you would do is you would take blanket rolls, not under the knee itself, but slightly below the knee, so that the blanket roll or the blanket fold and support is actually more under just the shin. So in this scenario, you're actually providing a little lip, if you will, for the front of the knee to hang off of. And this can help that knee be much more floating in free space and have no pressure on it. The other thing that we can do is if the knees hurt, especially if the inside of the knee hurts, the more medial side of the knee, we can take the knees a little bit wider in the pose. Just like the pelvis does not need to be directly stacked over the knees, that's just a conventional and somewhat arbitrary decision. The knees do not have to stay, the thighs do not have to stay parallel to each other. If that works for your body, great. But for many people, it's a much better thing to allow the knees to go a little bit wider than the hips. I will point out, this is not likely to compress the lower back. Taking the knees into an abducted position doesn't compress the lower back. What compresses the lower back is compressing the lower back by going too far in the lower back. So if your knees are suffering, try one of these two options. The fourth way to improve our experience of Ustrasana is to focus on 3 technical improvements in the pose: using the glutes, using the scapula, and using the ground. I advise that when you do Ustrasana, you engage your gluteus maximus. Now, your gluteus maximus, along with your hamstrings, are hip extensors. They help extend the hip. And that's 100% of what the hips are doing in this pose. You want the hips to extend, so we want to engage the hip extensors. Now, When I suggest that you engage your glutes, I'm not suggesting that you use them to push the hips forward. In fact, from the first technique that I advised in this pose, I actually advise if there's any lower back discomfort, we let the hips shift back. We don't need the hips to be pushed forward, and we can engage our gluteus maximus to support our body more appropriately without shoving the hips forward. Second, when you focus more wholeheartedly on drawing the shoulder blades in and down, you can use those shoulder blades to get a little bit more leverage into thoracic extension. Opening the upper back in the pose isn't just about pulling the chest up, it's about supporting it from the backside. So when you're in this pose, focus a little bit more on the shoulder blades drawing towards each other and drawing slightly down. Third, use the floor. I, like so many other yoga teachers, often cue to lift, 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 lift. But how do things actually lift? Things actually lift by something that they're connected to, pressing down. The locomotion that we create to lift up into the pose is really facilitated by the downward pressure that we can achieve into the ground. So in this pose, press the shins into the floor. Similarly with your hands, whether you're holding the heels or you have your hands on blocks, focus not just on kind of lifting the chest, but really pressing those hands down. Finally, we're gonna improve Ustrasana by improving how we go in and out of the pose. We're gonna use the transition to build more symmetry in the posture, more strength and flexibility in the quadriceps and the hip flexors. To do this, we're not gonna ask the pelvis to stay vertically stacked over the knees in the pose. We're gonna want it to come with the upper body in the transitions. You're gonna keep your spine neutral, you're gonna firm your buttock, and you're gonna start to lean your whole body back in the direction of the heels. This is gonna get really difficult really quick. You're gonna feel the quads burn. This is building strength, control, and flexibility simultaneously. Now, as you lean the whole body as far back as you can without arching the spine, take your hands to the heels or to blocks at the same time. So make that a simultaneous connection so you have symmetry. Now, press the floor away, draw the shoulder blades towards each other, maintain that firmness of the buttock, shift the hips forward and the chest up. So you start to bring the whole body into the more conventional shape of Ustrasana. You gently press it forward, especially the hips, and the chest up. Now, as you do this, if it starts to feel jammed up in the lower back, you need to bring the front ribs in. You need to let the hips shift back a little bit. Stay a few breaths in the pose, as spacious and open as you can. Then don't just pull yourself out of the pose by asymmetrically kind of throwing your body out of the pose. Instead, shift your hips back again to the first place where those hands came to the heels. So you shift the hips back, then you bring both hands symmetrically to prayer, and using the strength of the front body, pull your body back up so that you're now stacked over the knees and sit back down on the heels. Ustrasana is obviously classic and it has so many applications and so much potential. But if you're a yoga teacher, not just in your own body, but seeing students, you know a lot of people need help with this pose. And I'm really confident that if you understand the work that we did in this episode, that you'll be able to help your students better. There's gonna be at least one student at least one time that something we've done here is going to help them really experience the pose and get the most from it. So thanks for spending your time listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there's some immediate applications in your practice and in your teaching. As always, I would love for you to subscribe. Those of you that want a closer connection and go deeper, of course, I'd love for you to check out one of my online courses. I'd love to get to know you better and work with you more deeply. As always, everybody, enjoy your practice and thanks for taking part.